Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. This is our second community forum on later start times for our schools. My name is Doug Lyons. I'm the superintendent of schools. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. This is our second community forum. I am working with the Student Services Subcommittee to collect information and to make a recommendation to the larger school committee in March about the possibility of later school start times. At the close of the community forums, we'll compile the data, work through the challenges that can be addressed, and we will likely make 3 recommendations to school committee with pros and cons attached to each. I'm sure there'll be plenty of conversation. As part of this process, we're going to get a survey out to faculty and staff, as well as parents. And we want to keep an eye, while we're doing this work, we want to keep an eye on the guiding principles that have gotten us here. And I will kind of summarize a lot of the work that we've done so far. So I got together with the Student Services Subcommittee, and we've been talking as a school committee, a larger group, with the administration about the possibility of later school start times. It's been a topic of conversation with our students, several of which have done civics projects on the benefits of a later start time. So we wanted to dig in on this. And we wanted to be very thoughtful and learn from other districts, what has gone well, what hasn't, which has brought us to this kind of forum place, the idea of having several forums or opportunities to present information and to also collect questions that people might have. And just creating a recommendation and thinking about guiding principles, it was important to the administration and to the subcommittee that we create a recommendation that reflect advice from medical experts in the field of sleep, take into account the social, emotional, and physical wellness of students that also correlate to their age as high school students, or when they kind of reach puberty, things change. We also want to make a recommendation that's thoughtful and helps the largest number of students possible. In hearing from other districts, one of the things that has been kind of conveyed to us over and over, that there's no panacea, there's no magic potion or magic bullet. But if the goal is to kind of make a thoughtful recommendation or make changes that can positively impact large numbers of students, then you're on the right track. We also want to make a recommendation to school committee that is sustainable. So let me dig in. We have a few slides and we can take questions. We've also, in the information, we sent an email out advertising the evening, and we've gotten a few questions back that I can cover at the end as well. Ian, can you switch the slide, please? Hey, thank you. So as I mentioned, we wanted to collect information and have our work grounded in science. In our first community forum, we welcomed Dr. Judy Owens, senior faculty and pediatric sleep specialist from Boston Children's Hospital, to come. She did a presentation for us that was pretty thorough. It took about maybe 60 minutes. That slide deck is available online, and we'll make it available if you need it or haven't been able to access it. But what we wanted to do is just to summarize some of that information here this evening. And some of the takeaways, what we think is important takeaways, is that all adolescents experience a normal shift in their circadian rhythms with age and on the onset of puberty, right? We see, if you have children, you'll see as they're getting older, 7th grade, 8th grade into high school, they'll stay up later, but they'll also want to sleep later in the morning. It's kind of their natural defaults. During this time, it results in kind of a natural biological shift in the delay in sleep hours. Dr. Owens talked about the forbidden zone, when students might have fallen asleep in their earlier years in 7th grade or 6th grade at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. When they start to enter that kind of puberty and they get a little bit older, instead of falling asleep, they get just the opposite happens in their kind of body chemistry. They wake up, they like to stay up later. And on a practical level, these factors, we talk about the forbidden zone. That's the kind of that time. Instead of falling asleep or winding down, they get jazzed up and stay up later. And so, teens also have a difficult time regulating themselves. It's one of the things that is kind of a constant battle of kind of just making good decisions and regulating themselves. And again, when we've done this work and we've talked to the doctor about this, one of the questions that we often get is that if we start school a little bit later, will that guarantee or will that mean that all students will get more sleep? And the answer is not necessarily, but it creates a clock or a schedule to give them just a little bit more time. So it does have the probability of positively impacting students in that space. Next slide, please. A question we also get is, who has made this change? And so this research is about 15 years old, and high schools across the country and here in Massachusetts. And what we've done here is we've highlighted the change in high school start times in the Middlesex League. And the two highlighted in yellow, Wakefield and Woburn, are the only two districts that have yet to make a change in their high school start times, right? And so in 2016, Superintendent Smith, Kim Smith, signed on to a letter that all the superintendents in the league signed on to really investigate the possibility of this. And we were digging into this. And then, of course, COVID hit, and which kind of flattened out all projects in this space. So, but for context here, 10 of the 12 districts in the Middlesex League have made this change. And that has also resulted in the change of athletics, after-school programs, and they've all kind of made adjustments, including bus schedules. So we are learning from them, and we will continue to do that as we work through this. So what has already been done? The Wakefield School Committee and the administration have been kind of exploring this topic over a few years now. Again, a presentation was made to school committee by students, I want to say 3 years ago now. Is it 3, Rick? 3? I asked because it's your daughter, right? And so a student made a recommendation to school committee 3 years ago, did a great job, very thoughtfully put together. And at that time, all but 4 districts in the Middlesex League had made the shift, and now there's 2. But we want to review the process and stay kind of in tune with and learning with what other districts have done well. We've also met with superintendents that have made this change and are making the change. We've discussed the topic with our union leadership that are here this evening during our joint labor management meetings. And we've discussed the topics with principals. We've talked to our transportation coordinator, our facilities director, our management and ops stakeholders to determine if later start times could be a possibility here in Wakefield. Next slide, please. Let's start. Next slide. Thank you. Good. Appreciate it. So what's important to note is the timeline. There'll be no changes until the 25. There'll be no changes next year, not next year. So our intent is if there's going to be any changes in school start times, that it will be done in September of 26. The reason for this is because we want to work very closely and get as much feedback as we can to address as many problems or conflicts or challenges that we can to, again, have a positive impact for as many as we can. We'll also be working with our union leadership because the high school contract is memorialized in the union contract. And so that we have to bargain any changes that would impact working conditions. So we will be taking time from September of 26, ahead of September of 26, September 25 to September of 26 to make that change. It will also align with the opening of the new high school, which is supposed to be January of 27. unless they're a little ahead of schedule, which we're hopeful for. But that's a quick update there. We also will be working very closely with North Reading Transportation, because transportation in our district is a big factor, not only for cost, but it also includes both the middle school and the elementary level, because we have 9 buses that serve all of our schools. So there needs to be a split between start times and end times so that we can continue to use those 9 buses. If we didn't do that and we needed to take on additional buses, it would be an additional cost to the town. And we will look at it both ways to look at the benefit or the cost benefit of each decision. Next slide, please. Other important information to consider is maintaining adequate spacing between arrival and dismissal times, as I've mentioned. Elementary start time. And so there's been a little bit of activity on social media about this idea that when schools do this, what they just do is they simply trade places, start times with elementary and high school. So what has been kind of passed around is this notion that, you could resolve this just by moving high school start times to elementary and elementary start times to high school, which on paper, yes, it could work. But in terms of the practical aspects of both running buses and doing what's good for kids, that is not something that's going to happen here. And that's not a recommendation that we will make. I feel like that's important to note straight away. Elementary start time in terms of our recommendations will not be before 8 a.m., right? And so we also have to kind of pay attention to not only how our buses are picking up both drop off and pickup, but we also need to attend to students that are we're obligated to provide busing for. That's students that live over 2 miles from their home school. And so I spoke about the Unit A contract. We're also looking at sustainability and financial impacts as we go into the budget season. So this budget season, we will be negotiating with North Reading Transportation and any other transportation provider that might be competing for our bus contract, because we have an outside vendor that provides bus services and transportation for us. So we'd like to open it up for you to ask questions. The principals are here with us this evening. The district administrators are here with us. Some questions we can answer. Many we're collecting information on, and we will get back to you. I can also share, after we've taken questions, the questions that we've gotten online that was sent out with an email. A form was attached. There was a hyperlink in it. And we've gotten a few questions there that I can speak to. Any questions or comments for us? Excuse me. Thoughts?
So just quick question. You mentioned faculty, and staff will be surveyed. So there's not been a survey yet, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Will we also survey the students as well?
We will.
Okay. I was just curious.
Especially our high school and middle school, yes.
Thank you.
Is the mic coming over? I think you might be right.
So just, the question I have is that I'm assuming... Okay, all right, there we go. So the question I have is that I'm assuming that there's all the, and I missed the November forum.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's, a bunch of benefits to the later start time and
Yes.
resetting the clocks for those students. I would say most, first and foremost, mental health, and then possibly achievement. I'm wondering, with all those, the other towns, the other high schools in the Middlesex League was that a recent switch for them, or is that where they've always been? And if they've done, like an after study, do they have any metrics about the impact on improved mental health, improved achievement, based on the fact that it was switched to a later start time? Just wondering if there's something that shows that, hey, we think this is going to help with our students, their performance, mental health. We did this, and for the past couple of years, we've seen that in comparison to what happened before.
We've gotten anecdotal information. We haven't gotten, for example, peer-reviewed research. There has been research done across the country when this change was first made. It is what prompted the changes. But we've spoken to the superintendents in the Middlesex League that have made this change, and many have reported that it seems to have helped with student attitude, student mental health, and there seems to be a positive impact on grades, but there's been nothing qualitative. It is qualitative, not quantitative. So that's an area that we can provide more information on, certainly. Certainly.
What is the impact for Wakefield Academy in the morning? How will this affect how the parents dropping the kids off early? Will it still be the start time that it is now, or will that be pushed back as well?
Yeah, we're in our next forum, our third forum, we're going to meet with our after-school programming group, our leaders there, as well as our athletics, fine and performing arts, to discuss some of those changes and how it has impacted other communities. So we are anticipating that any changes that are made, that we will, for example, if we start a little bit later at elementary or a little earlier at elementary, if any changes are made, we will start academy, we will adjust academy times as well. That was one of the questions that we got online, so thank you for asking it, Alex. No, it's okay.
I'm sure you already got this. The later start time for the high school, the impact of pickup and drop off with the VOC. I'm assuming that that would actually help with pickup and drop off to stagger the time differently between those three schools, but what is that?
So the vocational school, our working theory is that the VOC is going to have a separate entrance. It's going to come online when they bring the new high school online up the hill. So, which we believe will slow down traffic quite a bit in that area. So but we will also coordinate with them and understand. We'll try to, we don't want to do it at the same time because there still will be traffic going up the hill.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Sure.
So, is the start time of the Galvin being considered as an adjustment too, or is it just elementary and high
So
school?
we're looking at all three levels, elementary, middle, and high, right? Because it affects transportation, because we use the same buses for all three levels. They drop off at one and then pick up and drop off at another, right? So we need to maintain the splits in arrival and dismissal times.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I was wondering if there was going to be any impact otherwise, from the principals in terms of, you've got a different start time, a different end time. Will that impact anything in the middle of their day in terms of lunches, recesses, anything else going on with that?
So that's a great question. We're anticipating that our school day is going to be our school day. So we hope to be able to move, right? Just move everything accordingly. And when there are conflicts, we'll try to adjust accordingly, right? And so that's kind of a quick answer. So the school day is the school day is the school day. And so we also know at the high school, for example, with the new building, there's going to be a new student schedule, right? And so because there's going to be a new student schedule because of the size of the cafeteria, so our lunch schedule is going to need to change. So we're going to need to work on that as well. So it falls in line with this September to September timeline, which we plan to work on with our union leadership.
So we know that students will be surveyed, the staff will be surveyed.
Correct.
I'm assuming parents would, but what about the neighbors who live around the schools and how that later start time could potentially affect them and the traffic around, because we see the increase in density in our community. So we back up to the Walton. but I throw the kids over the fence, they jump. But just everybody parks on our street for pickup and stuff. So just wondering if we would be brought into the conversation or no.
I think we can certainly invite feedback, but it wasn't an audience that we had planned on surveying, right? At some point, when the survey sample gets so large, you get away from what are the guiding principles, and that is trying to make a thoughtful recommendation in the best interest of students, right? And so, now please, we take adults into consideration all the time, and that factors in, but we want our recommendation to be, whatever that recommendation might be. If we make, for example, Alex, 3 recommendations, a later start time in A, later start time B, or no change at all, right? And so we want it to be thoughtful, but we don't want, again, to get away from this notion of why we're making the change. We're making the change because we think it can have a positive impact on our older students. Ian, we have a question right down here.
No worries. So, forgive me if this was already answered. Is there times being floated already for all the schools?
There are not yet. There are not yet times that are being floated. When we make and we get a little bit closer and collect more information in our next forum will have our after-school program leadership, fine and performing arts and athletics. As we collect more information and get more information from transportation as well, I think we'll have a few more options to discuss.
So a follow-up question. In
Sure.
those schools that have already switched, did they all switch the same? Meaning it's still high school goes first, then middle, then elementary, or everybody did something different?
It could be different.
Hard to answer the questions when we don't know that.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
just me.
no, I think we're just trying to,
Okay.
collect
Thank you.
information at this point to make the best recommendation we can. But you make a great point, so, yeah, so we believe that, I think a thoughtful recommendation we would have to address elementary, middle, and high, right? But it might result in, for example, middle school going first, elementary going second, and high school going third. That could happen. It could result in elementary going first, middle second, and high school third. So that's kind of where we're at.
I have a two-part question. The first question was, are you considering a hybrid solution from transportation, adding more buses and a shorter gap between drop-offs between the 3 middle school? You don't have to answer yes or no, but I'm just something to consider potentially. And then the other questions or consideration that I'm encouraging is to see if there is a possibility for high school still to finish earlier so that they can help with the after-school academy. I'm selfish on that part.
Yeah.
Because of the half days and everything, they're short-staffed as it is already right now. And going forward, if that is switched, then it will become problematic even more for the younger kids.
It's one of the challenges that we need to address, not only for the academy, but for high school students that might be looking out for younger siblings, right? So it shows itself in a number of different ways. So I think that will absolutely play into our recommendation. And the students in the high school that work in the academy, oh my gosh, they are just terrific. We are super fortunate to be able to have our high schoolers work with our elementary students. So yeah, thank you.
So thank you again. I feel bad. We have all our principals and stuff here. So I'm just wondering if anybody here wanted to give feedback as well. I mean, I don't know if we're going to base everything on the survey, if there's a general consensus as far as the direction we're going, like which way we're leading or not, or if anybody wants to provide feedback as well, I'd love to hear that also. Thank you.
microphone. I broke the microphone, I'm sorry. I think what's important, it is very difficult when we talk about changes like this because there's a lot of obstacles, there's a lot of domino effects that can happen. And I think what's important is exactly what we're doing here, because as much as we have a lot of thoughts and ideas, it's important to hear from our stakeholders, whether it be our families, our teachers, our students, to be able to think of things that we haven't thought of, because everyone's going to come in with a different perspective. So what's good in some ways is that we do have a little bit of a format or something to build off of where other districts were, but Wakefield's unique in so many ways. So it's very difficult for us. We have constant communication with one another about what are the pros and cons, and I think it's been very wise to be very thoughtful and delay in making any rush decisions and really think about what's going to be in the best interest of our students. So it's a short answer to say I don't have an answer.
Just to tag off the comment about academy, does the high school have a work study program, or that maybe they could create for those students that still wanted to work in academy for early release, and so they could accommodate to those students?
So yes, the high school has an expanding internship program that we're working on currently. There are also some work options for students, but as Doug said, I think that the consideration of our students and their input or their participation in supporting Wakefield Academy is a consideration that we're thinking about, and how to support that given all the different factors that go into this decision. So, I mean, that could be part of the solution. I don't know if that will be ultimately the full solution, because as Doug said, right, the students working in Wakefield Academy is incredibly important, so.
Boys and Girls Club, so they pick up and work with the elementary and middle school kids. Have they been brought into the conversation in terms about the times for their pickup, and then how that, you send your kid, how much it's gonna cost. That would obviously have an impact on families as well, so I just wasn't sure about that. And then I have another completely different question. You talked about the unions and the contract.
Yeah.
Was that specifically just for the high school, or is that gonna be all of the contracts?
So anytime there's a change in working conditions, it's bargained, right? So if we're changing the middle school schedule or the elementary schedule, of course we would work with our teachers and our union on this. And so that's your second question. In regard to your first question, what was your first question again, Alex? Boys and Girls Club. Thank you. They're coming on February 5th. So we have a leader of the Boys and Girls Club here this evening. It's also a parent. So she has her parent hat on this evening. But the Boys and Girls Club leaders will be here on February 5th, along with representation from the rec, youth sports, as well as high school sports, fine and performing arts. And again, I think, I would be more cautious or more concerned if 10 other districts haven't gone ahead of us, right? And I feel like we have a lot of models and positives to kind of learn from, a lot of takeaways that are positives, and a lot of takeaways that are again, less than positive. And so some districts have kind of rushed to make these changes, and they've kind of bumped up against some other challenges after the change is made. We're trying to address as many challenges before we make the change.
Besides rushing into implementing this late start program, what are some of the other challenges that you've heard anecdotally from the other superintendents that you can share? The other is, I just want to share my immediate thought, and what I think is going to be positive is, as a working mother, I'm delighted by the fact that if my younger elementary kid is going to go to school later, go later, no, it'll be go earlier, sorry, then I can drop them off at the bus stop, leave my high school student at home who can hopefully independently go to school on their own and get to work earlier than I am now. So just a feedback for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's interesting. We sent out an email and had a hyperlink in it to provide questions for us. We had four people participated. 2 were comments. One was, we really appreciate this work and we feel like we will do what we need to do to support it, so thank you for it. Another was, this is a challenge and we'll present a challenge for drop-offs for us as a family in the morning. We're interested to hear how that might be addressed. We also had questions about other activities after school, which again, we're going to be able to talk about on February 5th. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sorry, Minky just had 2 questions, and we didn't address the first of her question, which was if you could share some learnings from other superintendents who've already gone through this. I think you were asking about the challenges that they faced. You talked about that there were some, but I think we're just wondering what those were.
Sure. One of the biggest takeaways is time and communication. And so, and that's happened. We've gotten that feedback in different ways, different forms. Boston tried to make this change a couple years ago and really didn't communicate well, and as a result, the change never really happened because the communication was not done well enough. And so that's a big one, and Boston's obviously on a different scale than us. We don't have 55,000 students, right? We have 3,500. But in terms of the Middlesex League, but we hear the same thing, which is time and communication and really kind of digging in and including people in the process, and so that's probably the biggest piece. The other kind of takeaway is including leaders from youth sports organizations and from kind of other organizations, because one of their biggest questions has been in towns like us is how will that impact our ability to access fields and courts and things that we've normally gotten into schools or gotten into gyms at this time. Will we still be able to? What will that mean? And so those are all things that we need to be able to address to, again, make a thoughtful recommendation. And it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be challenges that we will not be able to address, right? But we want to address as many as we can to thoughtfully make the change if we are going to make the change, right? And again, this work in this kind of giving time to collect information, our intent is to collect information as an administrative group and as a subcommittee of the school committee to compile that and then to make a recommendation in March to the larger school committee.
So you mentioned March. That was my next question. You're going to have the 3rd of the forums in February.
February 5th.
And is there another one before you go to the school board for us to hear kind of what is going to be proposed prior? Or is it just going to be like the average communication that comes home from the district?
So we will probably summarize the recommendation, Alex, and get it out ahead of making the recommendation. But that will be the plan. And I work directly with the Student Services Subcommittee, and we'll talk about that. Talk about how best to get the information out to kind of, again, allow for participation and timing and all of that. And again, just so that everyone hears my words, we will likely be making, a recommendation A, late start times as follows, recommendation B, and recommendation C, which might be no change at all, right? We've investigated this and we've made the determination that, under the circumstances, it's not the time for Wakefield to make this change.
We have a really dumb question, but is that who finally makes the decision, is the school committee?
Correct.
And when does that decision get made? I understand that you're presenting March, but how long will they take to make the decision?
My guess, so I can't speak for the school committee, but if I were a kind of what I think I know is that when we've done things like this, they take it into consideration and respond back at a later date. And so it wouldn't be made hastily in a meeting. It would be, we'll take this under consideration. We will get back, probably, likely not in the next meeting, but in the meeting after that, which would be 30 days. Is that fair, Stephen? Yeah. It should be.
We'll get there.
You can take this mic if you like.
To clarify, just in terms of expectations, and maybe, if so, the forum will happen on the 5th. I'm just reiterating my understanding from meetings I've been into. And then there will be 3 options presented to the school committee in March, such as we should pursue late. I don't know if people think that we're going to present options like the elementary should start at 8:05, and I don't. That's not my understanding that will be presented in March. You agree with me? Yeah. So the recommendation would be made to pursue this task, and then I would assume all of next year would be, again, we have to negotiate change in working conditions with the union. Yeah. So I just don't want people's expectation to. Correct.
Do this and be
Yeah,
done. Okay.
correct. So you're not going to hear it in March, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
I'm just trying to reiterate what I've heard.
No,
Just so you know what
It
to
sounded
expect.
like, wow, we're going to take all this time and then 30 days and we got this.
Right, no.
Yeah, no, yikes. That's the fun time. There's quite a bit of distance between the recommendation and the execution of a new schedule, right? And so, and a lot can change during that time. But we want to be thoughtful in whatever we might be moving forward to school committee. And again, it's, school committee will thoughtfully contemplate this and kind of weigh all options, right? You have a question, Stephen? Sir?
Just wondering, I know you guys had the expert, sleep expert, in November, discuss all, the benefits of sleep cycles, and extending that and the shift with adolescence and puberty. And so I'd imagine with all of that information that any shift in start times would have to be a significant shift to really have an effect, right? We're talking about sleep cycles, 4 to 5 sleep cycles, 90 minutes per cycle. If you're talking about really having an impact, that it's not going to be like a 7:30 to 8 o'clock, so what's a half an hour going to do to changing the effectiveness of sleep? I would imagine it would have to be about an hour and a half, at least an hour to an hour and a half change in start time for the middle school and high school. Did you guys, is that part of the conversation, or is that something that was discussed in that meeting?
It's very much part of the conversation. What we've talked about is kind of doing the work, and someone phrased it as, bang for the buck, right? Like, we've done all this work, and now to move start times 20 minutes. We're not going to get the benefit for students after doing, 2 years of work. And so, so that's very much something that we've looked at. And hearing from Judy Owens, the doctor, the sleep specialist who was here, she said, results in research that she's worked on, and national research that's been done, the window is around between 40 and 75 minutes. And so and 40 is really on the low side. She suggests 60, right, to strike a middle ground, but that's kind of what we're having. And so, and if you remember the slide, if I can click back, I don't know if we can click back, Ian?
Yeah, give it a try.
Perfect. But you'll see here some of these start times. For example, 8 o'clock, 8:05. We're feeling, we've discussed this. So the short answer to your question is yes, this is very much part of our conversation.
So it'd be more leaning towards 8:30, 9 o'clock start time.
We'd be leaning more towards between 40 and 75 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Just to piggyback on this a little bit, so what Dr. Owens did say was that the scientific data said that a large swing would be the most beneficial, but in a real world scenario, we probably wouldn't likely be able to get that close, but that any adjustment that we could make, there would be benefit. But so there's one clinical space, but then putting that into the real world, just a big shift, like she was saying, where you would really see some benefit, isn't necessarily possible sort of in today's culture, was sort of what she had presented on. One other thing I wanted to say was just sort of to how the process works after recommendations is that the school committee would take a time to the point about, like, is there time for input? Often when school committee thinks about things or when we're having discussions, it's open and we're very, we communicate that we're open about discussing things, and during that time, public input is collected sort of continuously all the time, sort of while we're talking about it. And so for whether that was a month or 3 meetings or whatever it was, we would be open to input. But I would like to think that by the time we go and talk to our union leadership, to the WEA, the most constructive thing we could do is go to them with some times, because I don't think that conversation is going to be tremendously fruitful if we don't necessarily have some targets. So that would be sort of one of my considerations, is I think we want to be a little bit more defined for those conversations, for them to have value. So my hope is that might be the course of direction, without being able to sort of forecast into the future, but I think that's what I see being sort of the most fruitful.
The one of the takeaways I had from Judy's presentation was 8:30 was kind of the time that she said high school would ideally start after. That's what I recall. Anyway, I don't know if I'm correct in that. But so my question was around the buses. So if there are 9 buses, so we've got a 7:30 high school start time, a 7:40 middle school, and then an 8:40. So what's the split between the buses for these 9 buses?
You figuring out the times for us already?
No, I was just curious.
And so I think that there is some flexibility there. So there is some flexibility there. So that's what we're working on right now with our transportation vendor. And there was a question earlier about transportation up on the left. Just to be clear, we'll present what adding buses might look like, just to be clear, and also staying with the buses that we have.
So, not that I want to figure out the times for you, but has staggering the elementary school been considered? I came from a district where the elementary schools were staggered because of the buses, and I'm wondering if that's also a consideration based on locations within the city and how the buses can get from place to place.
So if I hear your question, I hear you asking that, or I hear you stating that staggering start times for elementary. So some elementary schools might start at 8:15, some might maybe at 8:30. We have not looked at that. That's something that is something that's a nice suggestion we might talk to NRT about, right? And so right now we kind of have it down with the buses that we have. And one of the challenges that we also have is that this is a contract year for transportation. And what we're seeing in budgeting around the state is kind of these really large increases in kind of pass-through costs for buses. So that could have an impact on this conversation as well.
Piggybacking.
But it's a nice suggestion, thank you.
Piggybacking off of that though, Doug, would you foresee any complications in terms of legality? Like, so you would do theoretically Woodville, the high school, and like Greenwood at the same time, potentially, if you're doing that staggered thing, having like the high school kids sharing buses with the elementary school kids, is that something, because I know nothing about the busing, like I said, we hop the fence.
That's not something that we've done, and the reason we haven't done that is because the kids just have different start and end times. So, and it would be complicated if we did do that, right? So we would probably stay away from kind of mixing age groups or grade levels like that on the bus. Yeah.
I'm curious, I don't know how all the different, the school start times are now in
Yeah.
Wakefield. I'm assuming that currently, right now, you have elementary, middle, and high school all start at different times, right?
Correct.
So when we're talking about the 3 different time spots, if we do start considering these changes, the changes were considered for, let's say, adolescents, 7th, 8th, high school, would you then now split the entry time for the middle school? 5th and 6th would now add another different entry time because you would be considered that for 7th and 8th and then high school.
That's similar, I think we take that, I take it, as similar to the bus question. I don't know that we see a middle school as our school. Students enter together and they start together and they end together. And so starting, for example, 5, 6 at one time, and 7, 8 at another time, again, it's a hybrid suggestion, and could solve some problems, but that's not something that we've taken on just yet. And again, I think we can add that to the list of things that we're looking at as possible solutions. The other part that we want to be thoughtful about as well is, for example, our middle school is a community, right? Our kids and our teachers, there are teachers that serve multiple grades, right? So if we have teachers that are serving as specialists that serve, for example, 6 and 7, so start and end times being different would also present other kind of challenges or conflicts in regard to scheduling faculty and staff, as well as services that we provide. So there's a lot of layers to it, but it's a
Yeah,
nice-
so that was more of less of a solution with the start times and more of another problem that would arise, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are, and I'm assuming that we taught, the whole discussion was 7th, 8th, and up, right? Because you're talking about those students as they enter adolescence and puberty, you're eventually going to have to split those times if you're working off the study and the suggestions of when this is effective and when it's not, which would cause more problems specifically for the 5 through 8 middle school.
Yeah, I hear you. I think again, I go in instances like this when there's a dilemma, no clear solution. I think our default with our subcommittee and what we've talked about is, how can we make a recommendation to impact as many students as possible, right? So we might not get our 7th and 8th graders to 8:30, and the notion of puberty, when the onset of puberty is, it's kind of all over the map for students, right? Just walk around the middle school for 10 minutes and you can see that. But I do think that there are, again, a lot of layers to this, and we're just trying to make impact as many students as possible, right? So, but the information you bring up is really, I think, helpful and important, and it'll give us some things to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just full of questions, aren't I? How will this impact the transportation for the MEDCO program? I'm not familiar if any of these other districts participate in that or not, but I'm going to assume they're part of the conversation here and how that affects them.
Well, I think it has the potential, it has the potential to help students that are in the MEDCO program get on a bus a little bit later in the morning. We have some of our students starting at 6 a.m. or before, which is just really amazing. It's quite a lot. So, yeah, so it would impact them very much.
Follow-up, is it our buses that transport the kids back and forth, or would they have to negotiate with their transportation, whoever they have? Okay, it's through us,
It's us.
perfect.
All right, TJ's giving me the eye here.
I would just love to see, to a few people's points, I would love to see this chart with middle and elementary as well. And then I do have a question, I'm so sorry to keep you, what is going on with Doyle? Doyle has not been part of this conversation at all. Is there any discussion about changing the Doyle start and end times? Thank you.
So I think, Jess, we would anticipate that they would go with elementary. That's kind of our working theory right now. But we can also get the additional information that you asked for.
So there are families who have very strict work times, and there are single-parent families who wouldn't necessarily be able to accommodate a later time, don't necessarily have the resources or the privilege of telework to be able to have some other care to bring the child on time. There are children with disabilities that may lack, some executive functioning or other disabilities that would preclude their ability to independently go to school without some amount of supports. So I guess the one thing that I'd want to keep in mind is whatever sort of policies are decided with some attention to inclusion, equity, and justice.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have any pushback from anyone sitting on this stage about addressing those concerns. I think, when it comes to students with disabilities, it's our responsibility to make sure students are able to get to school, right? And so that's something that, especially when it intersects with a student's disability. So it's very much something that we're, I think, taking into account and looking at. In terms of equity and justice, those are other things that we're looking at as well. You heard the question a moment ago about our METCO program. We have students that are getting on buses at 6 a.m. or before. Those students could be getting on a bus at 7 a.m., right? Still, I think, arguably way too early, but potentially some relief. So there's a lot of parts to this, but I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
And I was just going to say something similar in that a lot of parents don't have that luxury of changing their start times. And as you know, the traffic is so bad. So either way, there's a lot of traffic, but it could make commuting worse for some folks, whether it be students or parents. So I think that's also something just to keep in mind, and for teachers. So if you're starting later, you're going to get stuck in more traffic, and then the drop off for their kids. So I do think it's a domino effect. I'm not saying it's wrong to start later. I just think all of those factors are going to cause a lot of effects down the road for other groups.
Thank you for making the note about our teachers. We have 600 employees, faculty and staff that could potentially be impacted by these changes at all levels, right? So it's very much something that is important to us, right? We can't open schools without personnel.
Last question for me, I promise.
All right.
And you know that's not true. When do you anticipate that we would know some kind of numbers on how this could affect us financially if we had to add more buses, if we had to extend the hours of academy in the morning to accommodate those students whose parents have to get to work? And if that would be, obviously I don't think it would be for this March meeting, but when the school board would start that conversation with, like, here's the actual time date, this is X, Y, and Z. Would it be the end of this year, or probably looking into school year 25, 26 when we start getting some numbers?
No, I think we would hope to share some plan or some model or some targets in the recommendation that we make to school committee. So it's not a blind change, right? And so we can tinker with the change, but not knowing or understanding what the change is a little difficult. But, and so we anticipate that there would be information that would be presented from the Student Services Subcommittee that would go to, likely there would be a summary from that group that would go to school committee and to the larger community in the process of any recommendations being made.
I know you were talking about some of the challenges you heard from other school districts for timing and communication. And I think one thing that comes to mind from communication that I like to hear going in is the information that you gather, feedback from all the different stakeholders in the community. what are the, positive comments and negative comments, and have them actually shared in quotes. I'm not saying all of them, but have them, because I think they will really speak powerfully. And knowing all of us going in, what are some of the positive things we expect to see, and what are some of the challenges we, and concerns people have.
Thank you for that feedback.
Do we have to get approval from DESE? So say it's implemented, nope, it's not something, okay, because I know it would obviously affect like the district handbook and whatnot, like putting all that in there. So,
No.
cool.
I think there's a question here, Ian. I'm pointing back there. Sorry.
So I know you talked about impact to after school and how that, will be handled. And then I'm listening to people talking about the difficulties that parents will have getting their kids to school at a different time. How much conversation has there been around before school programs? And do we have the ability to open up cafeterias, do before school clubs, those sorts of things? Has that been talked about?
It has, but we'll talk about it more on February 5th.
That was a perfect segue. So February 5th, I suppose like most parents here, I know myself, I'm busy that day and my wife would like to attend, but we have 2 kids. Is there any way we could do a Zoom on the next
Yeah, so
call?
this meeting this evening is available on Zoom.
It is as well.
It is.
Perfect. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm just looking at the time and thinking about our principals and our district leaders. I think we have time for probably one more question. Got it.
All right, can you hear me? I got one question up here from Zoom. And it is there an assessment about how much sleep Wakefield students are getting and how that compares to other communities that have made the change? I'm concerned that if we change the start times, it won't actually change how much sleep the average high schooler gets.
There has not been a study of the sleep time that Wakefield students get compared to other districts, or how we believe that this will change that. We believe, I made a reference, as did Dr. Owens in her presentation, just having the ability to have the grace to kind of start a little bit later gives you create the potential for them to kind of have that additional time. And so that's kind of the information that we've gotten from Dr. Owens, which I think addresses that question. But if the question is about kind of concrete research about surveying all students at the secondary level about their their sleep times, we have not done that. So, thank you. Sure.
So we actually do have some data. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Oh, there it is. We do have some data, secondary data on high school students' sleep time with the YRBS that we can actually look at.
Thank you so much.
I will tell you, having looked at it for the last few years, it is much less sleep. I can't give you a number off the top of my head, but I know looking at that number when it comes out every 2 years, it's less than we would like. And then the other piece that I just wanted to respond to, the Dr. Owens piece, it's not just about what she emphasized, right? Not just about how much sleep, but also when. And when adolescents fall into those periods of deep sleep, which if you have teenagers at home right now like I do, it's right about when they get up in the morning. So that idea of pushing it back for teenagers is not just about how much, but also when. So I think that's, if you didn't see that in her first presentation, it's really important to look at that piece.
Are we up this year to have the CDC youth risk behavior survey that would collect that data, or are we on like the other year part?
It's this year.
Okay.
So thank you for sharing that, Amy. We can also provide that in our kind of summative information that we share. Thank you so much. We'll be collecting all of the questions. We took notes this evening. It's recorded. We will also take the information or questions that we've gotten online, and we will address those. And so thank you for your feedback. It's much appreciated. If there's additional information that you'd like to discuss or thoughts that you have, I would urge you to reach out to myself or anyone on the stage to provide either your questions or your perspective. Thank you so much.